everybody, this is Craig from the University of Applied Research and Development, and I'm delighted to have Carys Evans with me today from the UK, from Swansea. She is a Learning and Development Specialist. Welcome.
Hi Craig, thanks for having me.
So great to have you here. Why don't you tell us about your role and what you do?
So I am the UK Learning and Development Specialist for a manufacturing company which is based in South Wales in the UK, but is a global organisation, and it specialises in installation, so stonewall installation particularly. So I've been with my current organisation for 6 months, and I am the learning and development function, I suppose is the best way to put it. So I'm responsible for all of the learning and development of all of our staff in the UK. But I am also part of the global learning and development team, so I do get to work with my colleagues across the globe on various learning and development initiatives for our people worldwide. It's a very varied role, but I am the only learning and development there, so I get to do all parts of learning and development.
Wow, and it's a global team. So how many staff across your organisation?
So in the UK, there's probably around just under 500, but worldwide there's 11,500.
Wow, that's a big number.
Big number.
So what brought you to this role, or what attracted you to the role?
Well, this role in particular, with my current organisation, was the opportunity to set up my own function. So I've worked in learning and development a long time, 15 years, across lots of different sectors. And I really was ready for that challenge to set up my own learning and development department, my own L&D policy, and the company I'm in now was able to give me that opportunity. And also that opportunity to work on a global level was really interesting to me, because there's just so much more you have to take into account when you're designing programs and initiatives for a global audience. So that was really exciting as well.
So in your role with learning and development, do you only focus on the technical side of installation, or does it cover everything?
So it covers everything. In fact, my role probably covers a lot less to do with the technical installation itself, and actually more around creating learning and development cultures across the organisation to drive our business goals. So my role is to work with our senior management team, so like the equivalent of, kind of like the board of directors then in other organisations, to identify with them the learning and development strategy required for their function in order to deliver on the business goals in line with the business strategy. So my role is a lot more strategic these days to what it was when I kind of first started in learning and development, and I was cutting my teeth delivering training every day. So now it's a lot more strategic, and it's really identifying the right kinds of solutions to tackle the right priorities at the right time.
Tell us about how you go through that process with those managers and leaders, and the types of implementations that you do.
So it all begins with understanding the wider business. So what's the business's direction? What are the goals? And really kind of getting your head around that piece first. Then you can start to work with those functions more specifically to really understand what knowledge, skills, behaviours and attitudes are going to be required within that particular function to enable them to meet those business goals and obviously achieve it on behalf of the organisation itself. So what the approach I took, and I suppose I'm quite lucky in some respects that I've obviously worked in L&D long enough to be able to have done this relatively quickly. So I designed a workshop which brought together key stakeholders within that department, and sometimes stakeholders from other areas of the business who had some type of involvement in the L&D of the people within that function. And it was a very simple workshop. We started by thinking about what knowledge, skills and behaviours will our people need when we've achieved that goal. So when we've achieved that goal, what will that look like? So we looked into the future first. Then we looked at where we were today. Okay, so where are we today then in relation to those knowledge, skills and behaviours? And then the kind of last part of the session was for us to really kind of think about, all right, well, what's the priority? And this was quite a key activity within that session, because sometimes when you work in organisations, it can be quite siloed thinking, and every department thinks their priority is the most important. So sometimes it's really beneficial to get all of those people around the table so that they do get that bigger picture, and that they understand, okay, well, what's my priority might not necessarily be yours. So the strategy then was built around this almost like a gap analysis between where we are today as to where we go into the future, and it was kind of built around these key themes that we needed to focus on throughout the year.
I thought it was really quite exciting that you said that the position or the department didn't exist so prior to you arriving. Why don't you tell us about what were the drivers that made this organisation think they needed that, and then what you did to establish that?
So I definitely think our managing director was a big key influence there in getting this role set up in the UK. So this role, the role I do, does exist in other parts of the group, as I mentioned, but we didn't have an allocated individual in the UK who picked up the learning and development remit. It was just shared amongst the rest of the HR team. And our managing director is very, very invested in learning and development. He sees it as a strategic enabler, which is absolute gold dust. Like to work with someone who already knows that this is a strategic enabler is just an absolute dream. And they're that passionate about learning and development that it's actually one of the business goals. And I've never worked in an organisation before where learning development is a goal of the business. It's one of its own goals. So yeah, I think the managing director and that buy-in at the top has definitely been one of those big drivers for learning and development there. However, across the group, the learning and development approach is very much in line with the 70-20-10 principle. So I'm not sure how familiar the people be watching this will be with that. But the 70-20-10 principle is a learning and development model. And Charles Jennings is generally the one kind of attributed with really kind of bringing this into businesses. But essentially the model kind of works on the idea that in order for learning and development to be effective and to really make a difference, for it to really be remembered, 10% of what you learn comes from a structured, formal kind of learning environment. So that might be a face-to-face workshop, it might be e-learning, it could even be considered like reading books and articles, but this is something that's quite structured and formal. 20% then comes from social learning. So the conversations you have with others, getting feedback from other people to learn more about yourself, coaching conversations, having a mentor, just talking things through with other people and learning from other people's tips and tricks. That will come under that 20%. The 70% of what you learn, according to this model, is just through practice and through making mistakes and through just doing the job. And what is really refreshing is that at the organisation I work in, they're actually really, really good at the 70%. They've got some really great pockets of good practice around that 20% and the 10% as well. The 20% in particular is the most interesting, because where I've worked in other organisations where they have this model, the 20% piece is kind of brushed under the carpet. So it's either you go on a course and then sink or swim, or just sink or swim, and you may be lucky to get a course. But that 20% in the middle really does mesh those two kind of factors together. So that's been another gift really of working there and establishing the L&D function, is that actually they're already really invested in this effective L&D model. Brilliant.
Why don't you tell us about some of the other organisations or experiences and industries that you've worked in as well?
Yeah, so as I said, I've worked in learning and development for 15 years, and I have worked in 5 different industries across that period. So I started out in hospitality, so that's where I really first learned how to be a trainer. It was a lot more instructional training, kind of watch me do it and then you have a go. It was a lot more like that. But I did really get a fantastic kind of start in my learning and development career in one of the hospitality companies I worked for, a very kind of popular restaurant chain here in the UK, and it is worldwide as well. But they had a massive passion for learning and development, and they really, that kind of idea of developing your people was very ingrained into the company culture. So I was very, very lucky to have started my L&D career in a business like that. So that was a lot more, as I said, kind of instructional stuff. It's also where I started to cut my teeth around leadership development as well. So where I really started to kind of hone my own kind of skills as a leader and manager, and also kind of really start kind of getting into some of these different leadership models and management styles, and understanding the importance of things like your communication preferences and your own personality preferences and how they can impact culture. So that was a really, really great start on the journey there. I then went to work for a third sector organisation, a global organisation that probably everyone will be familiar with because of its symbol, which is red, and they specialise in disaster response. So I worked with them for about 2.5 years, and to this day, working there has remained one of my favourite L&D jobs. So what was amazing about working there was the motivational drivers for the learners in that organisation were very, very different to the motivational drivers of the learners in the private organisations I've been in before. So being third sector, being a charity, it was all volunteer led. So from a learning perspective, you had individuals who weren't motivated that if I learn this, it means I earn more money, or it means I get a job promotion. They wanted to learn these skills because they wanted to go and make a difference for other people, or they wanted to just challenge themselves and move themselves out of their comfort zone to learn something that they didn't do before. And it was just so refreshing to work in that kind of environment, and wonderful for me in terms of my own L&D development to kind of really experience working with learners that have got very different motivational drivers. So absolutely loved working there, and to this day, one of my favourite L&D jobs. I left there then to go and work in the travel industry. So another big global organisation, 70,000 employees across the world. Massive high street brand here in the UK and particularly across mainland Europe. So this was a completely different type of L&D job to what I'd had in my other places. So in this role, I was very much more involved in operational training, and I was the training consultant for a group of contact centres. Now, a contact centre environment is a beast of itself. Very, very different training kind of style required there, and it's almost an art form in itself, really, kind of balancing training calendars in a contact centre environment when, you know, the nature of their job is to be on the phone all day. So it can be quite a challenge there to kind of say to managers, oh, this course is going to take a week. going to be half a day? No. So that was a completely different experience to me. I didn't have a contact centre background before. You know, I knew my stuff from a learning and development perspective, and I clung on to that as best as I could, because I'd never worked in travel before and I'd never worked in a contact centre.
Wow.
But it was, again, another fabulous opportunity. And some really kind of key skills came out of me working there, which was around stakeholder management. So I think this was the first kind of experience I had around kind of having to really challenge a senior manager on kind of decisions being made around training. So that was the first kind of opportunity that I had at that. And that is a skill set that has served me well ever since. And something else that was also really, at the time, I was a bit like, oh, what am I getting involved in this with? But actually now, looking back, like 5 years later, I think to myself, I'm so glad I had that opportunity. And that was to actually work on projects. So in lots of big, massive organisations, projects happen on a daily basis. There's always a new platform that's going out. There's a new product coming. There's always something. And training and learning and development, particularly training element of L&D, is always a factor in that happening. So if there's a new platform, these people need to be trained on how to use it. If there's a new product, people need to be trained on how to sell it, or whatever the case may be. But what's always interesting is that training is kind of forgotten about until the thing's about to go live. And working there and getting that experience of being involved in projects actually quite early on, and being that kind of training lead and making my recommendations on, actually, no, I think we should do it this way, etc., really, really set me up for the company I went into following that, and the company I'm in today. And one of the great projects that I was involved, well, there was 2 projects I was involved with at that travel company, which were the transition of these contact centres. So I was based at the one in Swansea. However, they used to have one in Coventry in England, which they were closing down and expanding the Swansea one. So we started in Swansea with something like 30 staff, and by the time I left, they had 350, and I was there 2 years. So it was like a conveyor belt, right? Get them in every time, build up the numbers and the seats for the contact centre. So to go through that kind of major project was really such a massive learning opportunity for me. And then we repeated it the year later out in South Africa. So this was even better. So we went out to South Africa because we were moving our kind of third-party contact centres. So they were originally in India, whom I'd had to work quite closely with for the time prior to that. But now we were going out to South Africa to go and set up the contact centre function there. So I had to go out there and go and train up their training department and train up their first couple of batches of advisors. And that was just a fantastic opportunity, like wonderful experience. Not only to be in South Africa, but also just coming back to this kind of culture piece again. So, obviously up until that point, all of my kind of L&D career had been in the UK. So to have to go in, and particularly with what we were kind of training out there, it was a great learning opportunity around kind of actually the cultural differences in customers as well. And there were some like little nuances there that we really had to flex out in the training when we were out in South Africa, because obviously when I designed the training in the UK, it already kind of took into account that everyone knew what this brand was. Everyone was really familiar with the concept of going on a holiday, because that's how it is here in the UK. So that, again, another fantastic opportunity for me there to kind of really understand that, depending on where you are in terms of learning and development, you are going to have to take in those local cultures into consideration as well. So then I had enough of that, and I went to a finance company, and that was another a significant learning curve as well. So obviously we're all familiar with the financial crisis of 2008. And as a result of that, and I'm sure this is very much the same where you are, over here in the UK, regulation within financial services is very, very tight. And something that has a significant kind of weight behind it then is training and competence. And there's so much governance that needs to be put in place there to prove competence in terms of selling financial products and advising on financial products, etc. So this was even though every company I'd worked in had some level of regulation, like when I was in travel, I had to work under Civil Aviation Authority's regulations. When I was obviously in hospitality, there's all the food safety regulations and health and safety law, etc. But this was the first time I had to really work under a regulator. And this, again, was where I learned so much around governance and the importance of things like version control, which I obviously knew was important because I'd done it before, but never really quite realised to what level I had to take that type of verification of my sources and things, and evidence and reporting, and so it really did kind of open my eyes more to the analytics within learning and development, which up until that point, I suppose the analytics in learning and development that I've been used to was more Carys really run a report on how many people have been on training this year, which is obviously, not really worth the paper it's written on, doesn't tell much, does it? But working there, we were really able to tap into and explore the opportunities within data analytics in learning and development, and actually start trying to make some connections between, okay, well, when they've been on this course, what has that impact been 6 months later to our numbers and these different things? So there was really great kind of opportunity there for that. I did a lot of leadership development there as well. So we got quite creative with some of the leadership programs that we put on there, and we were able to really kind of create interesting programs, which I know sounds a bit daft, but sometimes when you work in some organisations, there's already a quite defined leadership approach. Be it right or wrong, that's the leadership approach that they've got. What we were able to do there was to be really, really creative and to be really curious. Sorry, that's my dog. To be very curious as to what are the different methods of what are the different leadership models that are out there? What are the different theories? What's the different thinking? So that was really refreshing to be in such a position to almost come up with almost like a smorgasbord of leadership development that we were able to put out there for the people in that organisation. So that was really, really great. And then I come to where I am today.
Carys, that's really great. Look, if someone was trying to get into learning and development in this type of industry, what sort of advice would you give them as they plan their careers and launch their careers?
Ooh, I think my biggest piece of advice would be to get curious and stay curious. And the reason I say that is because if you have this curiosity within you around learning and development, you will be more inclined to focus on your own personal development because of the curiosity of, what if I look into Lean Six Sigma, for example? What's that going to do? What about if I look into neuroscience? What's going on there? Those little curiosities will inform your own personal development, which will allow you to really kind of think outside the box then when you are looking to design courses, when you're looking to design bigger solutions for bigger organisations. But the other thing around curiosity, so it's not just for your own personal development, but it's also that when you're actually working with stakeholders, asking questions is so important, because what they think is a learning need most of the time isn't. So the more questions you ask to really get under the skin of that, the better, well-rounded solution you're going to have to be able to give that organisation. So get curious and stay curious is probably the biggest tip I could give anyone who's considering a career in learning and development.
Carys, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate your wisdom, your experiences, and your advice for the new graduates.
Thank you so much, Craig. It's been lovely chatting with you.